What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of the 2006 draft? Not much, right? Out of all the drafts I've covered, this one doesn't get talked about much. Sure, it had LaMarcus Aldridge, Brandon Roy, and Rajon Rondo, but outside of those names off the top of your mind, can you name anyone else? Yeah, neither can I. Now, we always label the 2000s draft as one of the worst drafts of the 2000s. Yes, it is that bad, and yes, I've covered it before. But could 2006 give it a run for its money? I think this is a question worth asking. But unlike the 2000 draft, analysts didn't think this draft was that bad in real time. I mean, if they did think it was going to be bad, would they say things like this for the 24th pick?
I think Kyle Lowry is a terrific pick for Memphis. Hey, if a fight breaks out, he's the guy you want on your side.
Or what about this for the 28th pick?
Hey, this could be the coming of a Michael Finley, 6'5", really a good wing player. I think they made themselves a solid choice this late.
So where did this draft go wrong? How could a draft that looked decent at the time go to being compared to the 2000s draft class? The only way to know is to go over all the picks, the standouts, the flameouts, and everyone in between.
With the first pick in the 2006 NBA draft, the Toronto Raptors select Andrea Bargnani from Italy.
By 2006, the Toronto Raptors were in a strange spot. They traded Vince Carter 2 years earlier, leaving Bosh as the franchise cornerstone. Bosh was young, talented, and clearly the future, but the team was spinning in its wheels. A disastrous draft pick in Rafael Araujo and a series of underwhelming trades had left them with a 27-55 record and no clear direction. Luckily, they had a secret weapon. No, I don't mean the pre-Heat dreadhead Chris Bosh. They had a young, prime Bryan Colangelo, the son of the famous NBA executive and the Phoenix Suns owner, Jerry Colangelo. You probably know him more for his Twitter antics rather than his GM moves. This was before he became well known for wearing ridiculously large collars and making his wife create multiple burner accounts for him. Don't ask, long story. At this point, he was still a young, bright-faced GM with a great reputation. He drafted future All-Stars Sean Marion and Amari Stoudemire in Phoenix, and helped them free up cap space to sign Steve Nash in the summer of 2004. Now, Mr. Colangelo had a vision. Pair Bosh with a stretch big man to create a dynamic frontcourt duo. And so, the Raptors used their first overall pick on Andrea Bargnani, a 7-foot Italian forward who could shoot. It was a historic draft pick, making Bargnani the first European player ever to be selected with the #1 pick. The days of Georgi Glushkov were long gone. Yeah, my bad. Who's Georgi? Back in the 80s, he became the NBA's first player from the communist bloc, breaking grounds for players from Bulgaria. At the turn of the century, European players were definitely a hot commodity, with guys like Dirk, Peja, and Ogalskis making multiple all-star teams. Naturally, teams were looking for young, tall European guys who could shoot the ball, and Bargnani was basically that. His mid-range shot, his range in general, and overall offensive potential made him look like the next Dirk. In reality, other than height and three-point shooting, his game didn't look like Dirk's. But that was the only point of reference scouts and reporters had at the moment. So, they were just going to repeat it over and over and over again. While the potential was there, Bargnani was far from a sure thing. Even during the draft broadcast, Jay Bilas bluntly said,
But he does not rebound, he does not post up, and he is not much of a defender right now. He's not physical. He needs to get his body improved. He needs to get a lot stronger.
Not exactly the words to fire up Raptors fans. In Toronto, Bargnani showed flashes of why he was picked first. He had a solid rookie season, averaging 11.6 points per game, and finishing as the runner-up for Rookie of the Year behind Brandon Roy. The Raptors season as a whole was a success. Bosh led the team to the first playoff appearance since 2002. Sam Mitchell won Coach of the Year, and our dear friend Colangelo was the Executive of the Year. The Raptors looked pretty promising that year. If their top picks could develop properly, and the management could build a team around them, well, they looked like they could be dangerous in the East. But as we know, things didn't turn out that way. While Bosh played great, Bargnani stagnated, and by his second year, he was regularly getting benched due to shooting slumps and poor defense. By 2011, the team was no longer looking like a future force. A couple seasons later, Colangelo was fired, Mitchell was long gone, and they even lost Bosh in free agency. Years later, Colangelo would admit that he was in large part responsible for the Raptors' lack of success. Basically, he tried tanking to secure high draft picks. And honestly, now it makes sense why the Sixers picked Colangelo to replace Sam Hinkie in 2016. After all of that, it was up to Bargnani and a young DeMar DeRozan. Yeah, as we know, things didn't go too well. That year, he averaged over 20 points a game, proving he could be a legitimate offensive weapon. But for every bright spot, there were glaring weaknesses. Let's talk about rebounding. For a 7-footer, Bargnani was historically bad. In 2013, he ranked dead last in rebound percentage among 7-footers playing at least 500 minutes, grabbing just 7.6% of available rebounds. For context, Kyle Lowry, a guy who would end up being one of the best Raptors players in history, often out-rebounded Bargnani, and he was a full foot shorter. I mean, just look at this picture and tell me that isn't insane. Bargnani's attitude didn't help either. When asked about his rebounding struggles, he famously, or rather infamously said, "It's called basketball, not rebound ball." There was also the time where he accidentally called his team the worst team in the NBA. And of course, he claimed he was misquoted on that. And you guys know how Gilbert Arenas and company like talking about Europeans not playing a lick of defense? Well, guys like Bargnani were mostly responsible for that. Although, interestingly, Gil's good friend Nick Young has the lowest defensive win share percentage in history for players that played at least 15,000 minutes. And I'm not trying to start anything, I'm just pointing that out. Despite his flaws, and admittedly there were a lot of flaws, Bargnani was not a complete bust. There were far worse number 1 picks than he was. His offensive game was legit. He had a soft touch, could knock down threes, and had a decent mid-range jumper as we mentioned earlier. But his lack of defense, rebounding, and consistency made him a frustrating player to watch, and the Knicks fans know this very well. Bargnani got traded to the Knicks to help the Melo-led team try and make a title run, but he ended up playing just 71 games in 2 seasons for the Knicks, shooting terrible percentages and compiling a solid lowlights reel.
Sets the table for Bargnani, look out!
His Knicks tenure was over when he ripped a ligament in his left elbow on a missed dunk attempt, a fitting end to a terrible relationship. By the time he got to Brooklyn, the injuries have just piled up. His motivation was nowhere to be found, and Bargnani's NBA career was effectively over. Bargnani wasn't Dirk, and he wasn't Darko. He was somewhere in the middle, a talented player whose shortcomings and mindset kept him from reaching his full potential. And even if you're not a Toronto or a New York fan, you shouldn't feel bad for Andrea at all. The dude seems to be living his best life. Just look at this Instagram screenshot from a couple years ago. And you see how he makes no mention of being a former NBA player basically anywhere on his profile? If Bargnani cared a little bit during his career, he definitely doesn't care at all now. But hey, at least we'll always have his ridiculous commercials.
With Primo Pasta and Sauce as part of a balanced diet and healthy lifestyle, Andrea can compete game in, game out.
Primo Pasta and Sauce.
Quick and nutritious, simply delicious.
The Chicago Bulls select LaMarcus Aldridge from the University of Texas.
It's not easy to earn a nickname like the Jailblazers, and it's even harder to shed it. By 2006, Portland was ready for a new view on life. The franchise was a mess, both on the court and off the court, and the list of offenses by its players was pretty long and kinda crazy to read. By the time the 2006 draft came around, most of these players were gone. Rasheed, Bonzi Wells, Patterson, all traded. Randolph, the last remnant, would be moved soon after. Portland needed to rebuild from the ground up, and their focus was clear: character, consistency, and talent. And that's where LaMarcus Aldridge fits right into our story. Portland technically didn't own the second pick at first. That belonged to Chicago. The Bulls drafted Aldridge, but Portland traded Tyrese Thomas and Victor Kriapat to secure him. Why? Because Aldridge was everything the Jailblazers weren't. At Texas, Aldridge built his reputation as a disciplined, hard-working player. While his critics labeled him as soft or too finesse, his polished game stood out in a draft filled with question marks. He wasn't flashy, but he was fundamentally sound and deliberate. Aldridge's game was rooted in simplicity. As he later explained, "I went middle like Tim, faded away like KG, and had a high release like Sheed." That combination made him nearly unstoppable in college. His sophomore stats, although pretty good, don't tell the full story. He had a high basketball IQ, was efficient in the post, and already perfected his mid-range jumper, which would later become his bread and butter in the NBA. He was also a defensive force, earning Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year honors. Aldridge recorded 16 double-doubles in 37 games that season, tying for 5th place on Texas's single-season chart. Unlike the erratic and controversial players of the Jailblazers era, Aldridge embodied a quiet professionalism. He didn't create drama or headlines. He let his game do the talking. This, combined with his potential to develop into a high-scoring forward, made him an easy choice for Portland, even if the critics weren't entirely sold on his toughness. Aldridge's NBA career would justify Portland's decision. Over 16 seasons, he averaged 19.1 points and 8.1 rebounds per game, making 7 All-Star teams and earning 5 All-NBA nods. He became one of the most consistent big men of his era, scoring over 20,000 points thanks to his elite mid-range game and his ability to adapt over time. Still, in terms of 21st century number 2 picks, Aldridge wasn't an all-time steal like Kevin Durant, but he was far from a miss. He was the polar opposite of the players that gave the Blazers their infamous nickname: reliable, disciplined, and consistent. I know this may sound like a cop-out, but if you want to know more about Aldridge's career, go watch this video right here. I had to spend at least 10 minutes breaking down why he was one of the best forwards of the 2010s. And for all the people that already saw that video, I wanted to do them a favor and not have them hear it again. But don't worry guys, I don't do this for any of the other players in this video, and we still have like 20 plus people to go over. So without further ado, let's go on to the next pick.
The Charlotte Bobcats select Adam Morrison from Gonzaga University.
Adam Morrison. For a lot of basketball fans, these two words conjure up a pretty specific image of a tall, weary guy with a goofy mustache who had a pretty legendary college career. Of course, when you talk about draft busts from the 2000s, his name inevitably comes up. You can even say he's the poster child for high expectations and unrealized potential. But like the old head I am, I think some fans fail to realize that things weren't always like this for Morrison. Back in 2006, the hype around him was insane. Morrison was the leading scorer in the nation, co-player of the year, and a genuine star at Gonzaga. As they say, he wore his emotions on his sleeve, trash talking, arguing with opponents and refs, and even crying after losses. That made him must-see TV in the 2000s. But let's rewind for a moment. In 2006, the Bobcats were still a relatively new team, entering only their third season. They were looking to build an identity, something beyond being an expansion franchise. The roster had a few promising young pieces: 2004 Rookie of the Year Emeka Okafor, and point guard Raymond Felton from the 2005 draft. But offense? That was a serious problem. They ranked dead last in field goals made, despite being second in attempts. They needed a scorer, and Morrison seemed like the perfect fit. Oh my gosh, am I doing it again? Am I shamelessly plugging another video? Yes. I've made a whole video about the 2004 draft where we go over more on Emeka Okafor and the Bobcats as a whole, so if you haven't watched it, you should watch it after this video. Anyways, back to Morrison. I'm not sure how well known this is today, but a huge part of Adam Morrison's story was his lifelong battle with type 1 diabetes. While every single athlete has his own unique situation to overcome, you don't often hear the top guys fighting diabetes. Diagnosed at just 14 years old, Adam had to learn to monitor his blood sugar levels at all times. While this could have crushed his NBA dreams, Morrison didn't let it bother him. Right after a nurse gave him his second insulin shot, Morrison told her, "You better show me how to do this because I'm going to be doing it for the rest of my life." As mentioned before, there weren't many professional athletes with diabetes competing at a high level. Only one other player had done so in the NBA before Morrison, Chris Dudley, a journeyman big man known more for being at the end of Shaq's Mia's dunk than his stats. So even as a teen, Morrison had to prove that not only was he talented enough to play basketball, but that with his condition, he could play at the highest level. And in high school, he became a scoring machine at Meade High in Spokane, Washington, averaging 27.7 points per game as a senior. Local legend has it that he regularly showed up at Gonzaga practices to play pickup games with college players, and held his own.
What did you take as a high school kid what kind of approach did you take when you came to play with us as college guys?
You know, I always felt like I could play at that level. And so I kind of just came in with the mentality of, let's find out what I really need to work on.
He was a 6'4" guard when he committed to Gonzaga, the only school willing to take a chance on him. By the time he hit the court for the Bulldogs, he'd grown to 6'8" and emerged as one of the most unstoppable scorers in the country. By his junior year, he was leading the nation in scoring with 28 points per game, shooting 50% from the field and 43% from three-point range. In part due to his offensive skills, and in part due to being a tall, unathletic white dude with long hair. Larry Bird comparisons followed him everywhere. Gonzaga's coach Mark Few even called his rivalry with JJ Redick that season the modern-day Bird vs. Magic, which kinda doesn't really make sense. That statement was questionable even back then, and now that we know how things turned out, yeah, it's not great. But Morrison wasn't Bird. He was a pure scorer, not an all-around playmaker or defender. Still, his emotional style, visible passion, and clutch performances made him one of the most beloved college players of his generation. His bank game winner against Oklahoma State became an instant college hoops classic.
6, fires, go! Get a 3!
And when Gonzaga's championships hopes crumbled in a heartbreaking loss to UCLA, Morrison's tears on the court became the defining image of the 2006 NCAA tournament. Draft night 2006 was supposed to be the start of something special for Adam Morrison. The Charlotte Hornets, just 2 years removed from their inaugural season, were in desperate need of a star to lead their young franchise. Michael Jordan, then overseeing basketball operations, saw Morrison as the answer. I mean, why not? He was the co-player of the year, coming off a historic college season where he led the nation in scoring. The Bobcats ranked near the bottom in almost every offensive category. Morrison's scoring ability seemed like the perfect fix. The hype was real, and Morrison delivered in flashes during his rookie season. He averaged 11.8 points per game and showed glimpses of the offensive spark he brought to Gonzaga. but the transition to the NBA exposed glaring weaknesses. He struggled defensively and shot just 37.6% from the field. By midseason, he found himself benched, unable to adapt to the faster, more physical professional game. Then came the injury. Morrison tore his ACL in a preseason game before his sophomore season, sidelining him for an entire year. When he returned, he was no longer the same player. The explosiveness, the confidence that defined him in college were gone. After playing just 44 games in the 2009 season, the Bobcats traded him to the LA Lakers. Though his time in Los Angeles was short and unremarkable statistically, it came with an unexpected silver lining: rings. Morrison was actually part of the Lakers' back-to-back championship teams in 2009 and 2010, though he played sparingly. His career stats by the time he left the NBA were underwhelming for your average player: 7.5 points, 2.1 rebounds, and 1.4 assists, and pretty terrible for a third pick. Critics have been relentless in labeling Morrison as one of the biggest busts in NBA history. But context matters, guys. His ACL injury, coupled with type 1 diabetes and his lack of defensive capabilities, played significant roles in his downfall. Some argue his style of play was better suited for the modern NBA, where spacing and shooting are emphasized. Unfortunately for Morrison, he entered the league at the wrong time, on the wrong team, with the wrong expectations.
The Portland Trailblazers select Tyrus Thomas from LSU.
When the Chicago Bulls traded the second pick, LaMarcus Aldridge, for Portland's fourth pick, Tyrus Thomas, they were betting on raw potential over polish. Aldridge was the safe pick, a player whose game was already NBA ready. Thomas, on the other hand, was a wild card, a 6'9" athletic freak with a 7'3" wingspan and one of the highest verticals in the draft. Coming out of LSU, he wasn't just a good prospect, he was the kind of player that gets GMs dreaming about their next superstar. In college, Thomas had a solid run. He averaged 12 points, 9 rebounds, and 3 blocks per game while helping LSU to the Final Four. But where he truly shined was in the pre-draft workouts. The first sentence of an early ESPN report about his pre-draft workouts read, "Tyrus Thomas is hungry." Teams couldn't stop talking about his motor, his explosiveness, and his defensive instincts. Randy Livingston, a seasoned NBA journeyman who trained with him, said, "I've never met a kid so driven. He wants to go get better, and he'll work on it until he gets it right." At the time, it was easy to believe those words. Watching Thomas sky for rebounds and block shots in workouts, it felt like he could be the centerpiece of a team's defense for years to come. But the hunger that he showed in workouts didn't really translate to the NBA. In Chicago, Thomas had flashes of his defensive instincts and athleticism. He even became the first Bull to compete in the dunk contest since Scottie Pippen. But he had a problem securing a roster spot and playing good minutes. His rookie season saw him average just 5.2 points and 3.7 rebounds in limited minutes. At his peak, Thomas averaged 10.8 points, 6.4 rebounds, and nearly 2 blocks per game. Unfortunately, his offensive limitations and a fractured forearm stalled his progress. Thomas was eventually traded to Charlotte in 2010, where he signed a $40 million contract but struggled to live up to it. By 2015, he was out of the league, and after a brief comeback attempt with the Grizzlies, he retired in 2016. So why did this talent never pan out? Basically, Thomas's play style never evolved beyond what it was in college: finishing, rebounding, and blocking shots. To excel in those areas, you don't need much skill development, just natural talent and effort. And while his defensive numbers were respectable, 1.3 blocks per game across 400 career games, his offensive game remained stagnant. Limited finishing ability, no consistent jump shot, and trouble staying on the floor due to injuries, and conditioning made it tough for him to reach the next level. Post-retirement, Thomas has found success as a coach, helping Liberty High reach a state championship and joining the Green Bay Phoenix staff in 2024. While his NBA career didn't pan out much, he's showing that after the NBA, there's still life and growth to be made as a person.
With the 5th pick in the 2006 NBA draft, the Atlanta Hawks select Sheldon Williams from Duke University.
By 2006, the Atlanta Hawks were in desperate need of a turnaround. This was a team in dysfunction on and off the court. The previous season, they had an abysmal 13-69 record, the worst in team history, and they finished with a staggering negative 796 point differential. They ranked among the worst franchises in US sports, with apathetic fans and an arena so quiet that their star Joe Johnson could walk the streets unnoticed. This was the same team that in the past lost Julius Erving, David Thompson, and Marvin Webster to the ABA, and had a knack for bad trades that set them back decades. Coming off of this disastrous stretch, the Hawks pinned their hopes on Sheldon Williams, a celebrated 4-year star out of Duke, nicknamed the Landlord for his dominance in the paint. Williams was one of the most accomplished defensive players in college basketball history. His accolades were endless: 2-time National Defensive Player of the Year, Duke's all-time leader in rebounds and blocks, and one of only 3 ACC players to ever notch 1,500 points, 1,000 rebounds, 350 blocks, and 150 steals. A group that includes Tim Duncan and Ralph Sampson. Williams even recorded a triple-double with 19 points, 11 rebounds, and 10 blocks against Maryland, just the 3rd in Duke history at the time. Spending 4 years under Coach K did wonders for his reputation. Williams was fundamentally sound, tough, and mature, and a Emeka Okafor type who seemed like a safe bet. And we know how Emeka turned out. Atlanta hoped he'd anchor their defense and finally bring some stability to a team in shambles. But once he got to the NBA, things didn't quite work out. Williams' NBA career was underwhelming to say the least. In his rookie season with the Hawks, he averaged only 5.5 points and 5.4 rebounds. But his stiff movement and limited offensive skill set became glaring weaknesses. Thankfully, Atlanta quickly found a replacement for him in Al Horford, and Williams was traded to Sacramento in 2008. Over the next few years, he bounced around the league, playing for 6 different teams. But his role never expanded beyond being a bench player, and by 2012, he was averaging just 3.2 points and was more of a punchline than a contributor, infamously making headlines when he accidentally dunked a ball into his own face. Williams has had a low profile since leaving the NBA. He played overseas in France and China until 2015, and is perhaps most remembered now for his personal life. He was married to WNBA star Candace Parker, and the divorce in 2016 made headlines when Williams received $400,000 in alimony from Parker. His NBA career may not have gone as planned, but Williams still left his mark as one of Duke's greatest players. At this point, we basically saw 2 average power forwards get drafted, which is making this draft look a lot worse. But thankfully, the 6th pick would change that mantra.
The Minnesota Timberwolves select Brandon Roy from the University of Washington.
By the time he put his name into the draft pool, Brandon Roy was already a top-tier recruit at the college level. Multiple teams were trying to move up the board to draft him. One of the more interesting teams who were interested in Roy were the Los Angeles Lakers. Still, fresh off the Shaq trade, the Lakers were in a rebuilding phase, even with Kobe putting up historic numbers. They believed Roy could provide the perfect complement to Kobe. A smart, unselfish player who could handle the ball, score efficiently, and bring leadership to a team that desperately needed it. Reports suggest that the Lakers were willing to trade up to secure Roy, even inquiring about packages that involved players like Kirk Heinrich. But they stopped short of offering Lamar Odom, who they viewed as a core piece alongside Kobe. In hindsight, this looks like a missed opportunity, especially considering what Kobe would later say about Brandon Roy.
That's a bad boy. And I think making it the second time just kind of solidifies yourself in terms of being one of the premier players in the league.
So what gave Roy such a great reputation? His story starts at James A. Garfield High School in Seattle, where Roy joined the junior varsity team as a freshman and cracked the varsity squad by his sophomore year. By the time he graduated, Roy was a 2-time King Co-Conference MVP and a top 50 college prospect nationally. His senior year saw him average 22.3 points and 10.4 rebounds while leading Garfield to a 4th place finish in the state tournament. Roy's talent was obvious since high school, but injury started to take a toll on his body even back then. He tore the meniscus in his left knee, a setback that required surgery. Despite this, Roy entertained the idea of entering the 2002 NBA draft straight out of high school. His sole pre-draft workout was with who else than the Blazers, where he faced off against Boris Diaw. Recognizing that he wasn't physically ready for the NBA, he wisely opted to withdraw his name from the draft pool and go back to college. At the University of Washington, Roy steadily improved each season. While he played a complimentary role early on, his senior year was nothing short of spectacular, averaging 20.2 points, 4.1 assists, and 5.6 rebounds. Roy led the Huskies to a deep NCAA tournament run and back-to-back Sweet 16 appearances. His late-season heroics, including an 8-game winning streak and a dominant performance against Utah State in the tournament, boosted his draft stock significantly. Detlef Schrempf, a Washington basketball legend, lauded Roy as the guy who elevated the Huskies to contender status. By the end of his college career, Roy was the Pac-10 Player of the Year, an AP First-Team All-American, and a legitimate top-tier NBA prospect. If you're any sort of NBA fan, the next part of this story should already be familiar to you, and it probably makes you a bit sad. In the NBA, Brandon Roy wasted no time proving why he was so highly coveted. Winning Rookie of the Year in 2007, he quickly became the cornerstone of a promising Blazers rebuild alongside LaMarcus Aldridge. Portland looked poised for a dynasty when Greg Oden joined the mix in 2007, but as we know, injuries derailed those hopes. At his peak, Roy was the best player in this draft class, easily, no questions asked, earning 3 All-Star selections and posting iconic performances like his 52-point outburst against Phoenix. His style, a mix of smooth scoring, clutch moments, and high basketball IQ made him, well, nearly unstoppable. Tragically, by the end of the decade, Roy's only enemies were his injuries. As I already mentioned, Roy always had a great basketball mind. He was praised for his high IQ ever since college, and although his body couldn't keep up, his mind was still intact. He used all of his knowledge to become a high school coach and help kids develop their talent, And you know what? He's pretty good at it. It took him more than 45 games to suffer his first loss. And as of 2024, his record as a high school coach is 82-6. And his teams have won WIAA 3A state championships in each of the seasons he's been coaching. Oh yeah, and the trade that sent Roy to Portland and Randy Foye to Minnesota is not considered great by anyone that knows anything about basketball. And if Roy remained healthy, the trade would have been, well, catastrophic for a lack of a better term. Roy became a 3-time All-Star and Rookie of the Year, showcasing superstar potential. Meanwhile, Foye, though solid, never reached franchise player status, averaging 13 points and 3.7 assists during his Minnesota stint. Speaking of,
The Boston Celtics select Randy Foye from Villanova University.
This draft was pretty guard heavy. Nearly half the players selected were either shooting guards or point guards. And Randy Foye was definitely one of the better guards in the NCAA. He came into the draft off an impressive run at Villanova, where he was the leader of their groundbreaking 4-guard lineup, playing alongside Kyle Lowry, Allen Ray, and Mike Nardi. Foye was a crucial part of a system that was years ahead of its time. Their speed and versatility stretched defenses and created mismatches, allowing Foye to thrive as both a scorer and a playmaker. In his senior year, he averaged 20.5 points, 5.8 rebounds, and 3.3 assists, earning Big East Player of the Year honors. Foye's ability to rise in big moments was clear during Villanova's run to the Elite Eight, where he dropped 25 points in a tough loss to Florida, the eventual national champions. As a college player, he displayed everything you'd want in a guard: polished skills, solid physicality, and leadership on the court. He looked like a ready-now prospect who can contribute right away and play alongside Kevin Garnett. At this time, KG was growing increasingly impatient with the Timberwolves' inability to put together a stable roster that would contend in the stacked West. Foye entered the NBA with plenty of promise, but Minnesota's backcourt was kinda crowded with players like Mike James and Rashad McCants vying for minutes. He started the season slow, not scoring a point in the first 3 games he played. However, he slowly worked his way into the team rotation. Over the last 10 games, he was averaging 15.4 points and 3.8 assists, finishing the last game with a season-high 26 points. Foye made the best of his opportunities, earning NBA All-Rookie First-Team honors. Over 11 seasons, Foye became known for his adaptability and reliable shooting, setting the Utah Jazz franchise record for most three-pointers in the season in 2013. He also had a knack for hitting clutch shots, with a handful of memorable game winners sprinkled throughout his career. Even with all his success, Foye's name is inevitably tied to the Brandon Roy trade. And let me say, while Foye had a solid NBA career, the decision to move Roy, a player who became an all-star and the best talent in the draft at his peak, remains one of the Timberwolves' most regrettable moves. But as I said, if Roy had stayed healthy, the gap between the two players would have made the trade even more infamous. So Randy got kinda lucky. Accent on kinda.
With the 8th pick in the 2006 NBA draft, the Houston Rockets select Rudy Gay from the University of Connecticut.
Basketball heads from the 2000s, scratch that. 2010s definitely remember Rudy Gay, and anyone who played NBA 2K definitely knows who he is. But different people remember him differently. Was he underrated? Was he overrated? Was he one of the best players that never made an all-star team? Or was he just an empty stat sheet stuffer? Like in a majority of cases, the truth lies somewhere in between. Rudy at the time of his draft was considered one of the prospects with the highest ceiling. In fact, Draft Express said that he was a stat stuffer with #1 overall pick upside. They also called him the most gifted and naturally talented physical specimen in the NCAA. A 6'8" power forward with a 7'3" wingspan. He had the physical tools to dominate on both ends of the court. In his sophomore season, Gay averaged 15.2 points, 6.4 rebounds, 1.8 blocks, and 1.6 steals per game, all while shooting an efficient 46% from the field. He was the quintessential modern wing, a smooth scorer with the ability to defend multiple positions. Scouts were enamored with his ability to shoot mid-range jumpers, glide past defenders with ease, and rise for jaw-dropping dunks.
Play by Gay. Deflected by Rabbio. Lucky for Connecticut here in the second half.
When draft night arrived, Rudy Gay was selected 8th overall by the Houston Rockets. However, he wasn't wearing a Rockets jersey for long. Houston quickly traded Gay along with Stromile Swift to the Memphis Grizzlies for veteran Shane Battier. In 2006, this move raised eyebrows. Gay was one of the most hyped prospects in the draft, while Battier was a steady role player who excelled on defense and intangibles but didn't fill up the stat sheet. Fans questioned why the Rockets would trade away a player with star potential for someone who was already viewed as a finished product. Years later, the trade looks a lot different. Shane Battier literally became the prototype for the 3-and-D role player and made an immediate impact on Houston's playoff runs. His ability to guard elite scorers and stretch the floor with timely shooting proved invaluable. Meanwhile, Rudy Gay evolved into a solid scorer in Memphis, but struggled to shake the empty stats narrative that followed him throughout his career. It's a classic debate. Do you bet on potential or prioritize proven reliability? In hindsight, the Rockets' decision to go with Battier fits the modern emphasis on team construction over star power. Rudy's rookie season was solid, averaging 10.8 points, proving himself as a reliable mid-range shooter with a knack for creating his own shot. As a sophomore though, he upped his average to 20.1 points. In between 2008 and 2017, Rudy would average 19.3 points, 6.1 boards, and 2.4 assists. But in spite of these numbers, his team would struggle to win. Critics labeled him as an empty stats player, a guy who could fill the box score but didn't elevate his teammates or contribute to winning basketball. The advanced stats didn't help his case. His usage rate was consistently high, but his efficiency numbers like PER and true shooting percentage remained middling. After 7 seasons in Memphis, Gay was traded to the Toronto Raptors in 2013, where the narrative still followed him. He put up solid scoring numbers but clashed with the team's direction. A midseason trade to the Sacramento Kings marked another fresh start, and Gay thrived initially, averaging over 20 points per game for multiple seasons. He saw some playoff success as a bench player on the Spurs, but we all know how that ended.
Leonard fires from the corner, and Leonard goes down again.
Throughout his career, Gay was seen as one of the league's most consistent mid-tier scorers. He played over 1,000 games and scored more than 17,000 points. Yet, he never shook the perception of being a player who was good, but not great. A star who wasn't quite good enough to make an all-star team. But in my opinion, Rudy Gay was a good player who never found the right play style that appreciated his work. The Grizzlies were a team known for their defense, while Rudy wasn't. And one of the grit and grind Grizzlies' farthest playoff runs came the season they traded Rudy Gay. He went to Toronto, but that was never destined to work out, even if Rudy turned into a legit all-star, because LeBron was still in the Eastern Conference. Then he took a long stint in Sacramento, which at this period in time was known for being one of the worst franchises. He goes to San Antonio, but San Antonio was cooked his second year there with Kawhi leaving. By the time he gets to Utah, he's closer to being out of the league than in it. Point in case, good player, but never found the right team. But he still made a buttload of money.
The Golden State Warriors select Patrick O'Brien from Bradley University.
And the award for the dude with the most Irish name goes to Sir Patrick O'Brien. The Warriors of the mid-2000s were a far cry from the dynasty fans would celebrate years later. Back then, they were stuck in limbo. Not bad enough for a top draft pick, but far from playoff contention. Their draft history from 2002 hadn't delivered much. They selected Mike Dunleavy 3rd overall in 2002. Well, Mike Dunleavy is their GM now, so this has got to make the Warriors one of the few teams who drafted their own GM. And Mikal Pietrus 11th in 2003, but neither pick panned out as hoped. Their previous successful selections like Antoine Jamison in 98 and Gilbert Arenas in 2001 had departed by 2003, before the team could build any momentum. One glaring issue was at the center position. Adonal Foyle was their primary option in 2006. A decent shot blocker, but a complete non-factor on offense. Veteran Dale Davis provided experience during 2004 before departing. Third-year center Andres Biedrins, drafted in 2004, showed promise but was still developing. Desperate for another paint protector, the Warriors selected O'Brien. At Bradley University, O'Brien caught attention in his sophomore season, averaging 13.4 points, 8.3 rebounds, and nearly 3 blocks per game. His stock soared after leading Bradley to upset wins over Kansas and Pittsburgh in the NCAA tournament, earning Missouri Valley Conference Defensive Player of the Year honors. With a 7'6" wingspan and raw defensive potential, he seemed like a solid pick for a team in need. But here's the thing, Golden State wasn't the right place for a raw prospect. Under coach Don Nelson, who preferred small ball lineups and rarely played rookies, O'Brien struggled to find minutes. And to make matters worse, the Warriors shifted into win now mode during their We Believe season. O'Brien became the first lottery pick sent to the D-League, and managed just 40 games in 2 seasons, averaging 1.7 points and 1.4 rebounds. After leaving the Warriors, O'Brien found brief stints with the Boston Celtics and Toronto Raptors. But O'Brien's inability to adjust to the NBA's pace and physicality, coupled with the lack of offensive skill, meant he could never secure a long-term role in the league. In total, he played only 50 games after leaving Golden State before his NBA career came to a pretty unceremonious end. Overseas, O'Brien found better footing playing in China, Lithuania, Puerto Rico, and Taiwan, where he won an SBL championship and Finals MVP. Like a lot of hoopers that you're seeing here from the 2000s, he wrapped up his career in the Big Three League. Due to unfulfilled potential, I think the most interesting thing about O'Brien was his nickname, the Notorious POB, which by 2000's crazy NBA nickname standards is kinda decent.
The Seattle Sonics select Mohamed Sene from Senegal. Mohamed is here.
Continuing on the theme of teams stuck in the limbo, the Seattle Supersonics. who were still in the Ray Allen phase, were going nowhere in the Western Conference. Without a dominant presence in the paint, they weren't getting past the second round, no matter how many three-point records Ray shattered at the time. The league was a different place back then. The Sonics leaned heavily on Allen and Rashard Lewis to carry them offensively. While their defensive numbers weren't the worst in the league, they simply just didn't have the muscle to stop big men like Amari Stoudemire, KG, or Duncan. At center, they had Johan Petro and Robert Swift, two project players who were looking more like projects that would never be finished. So the Sonics decided to gamble. They went all in on Mohamed Sine, a legit 7-footer from Senegal with a 7'8" wingspan, and a reputation as a defensive powerhouse in the making. Playing in Belgium, Sine averaged just 5.2 rebounds and 1 block per game. But scouts were captivated by his raw physical tools, and the idea was simple. With development, Sine could become the paint presence they so desperately needed. Unfortunately, things didn't pan out. Sine barely played in his rookie year, bouncing between the NBA and the D-League. His defensive potential flashed in 2008 when he earned Co-Defensive Player of the Year honors in the D-League. But the challenges went far beyond the court. As reported in the Seattle Post-Intelligencer in 2007, Sine struggled with ankle injuries and a significant language barrier. "I didn't understand the hard work. I didn't understand the NBA," he admitted. "Last year, I had a lot of trouble." The article revealed that unlike many NBA rookies, Sine didn't bring family members to help him adjust, often wandering the city and eating fast food because he was so unfamiliar with his surroundings. Back home, his newfound NBA status created dangerous situations, with his family receiving threatening phone calls and break-ins in Senegal, forcing them to relocate. "When your family is having problems, you are having problems too. That was my problem last year," Sine explained. These off-court hurdles, combined with his raw offensive game, ultimately sealed his fate. By 2009, he was waived to make room for other prospects. Sine's NBA career ended after just 47 games, where he averaged 2.2 points, 1.6 rebounds, and 0.5 blocks per game. He went on to play in France, Spain, and Taiwan, finding more success overseas, but never coming close to the promise that made him a top 10 pick. And for the Sonics, it was yet another swing and miss, during a stretch of bad luck and questionable decisions.
The Orlando Magic select J.J. Redick from Duke University.
We're officially out of the top 10, and finally, we have the most hyped 2006 college player, the old man in the three himself, J.J. Redick. In 2024, J.J. is definitely the most well-known player from the 2006 draft. After all, not only was he one of the most well-known podcasters and talking heads on ESPN, but he has continued his career in the NBA as the head coach, coaching one of the most famous athletes in history on one of the most famous teams in all of sports. If you didn't get it by now, JJ is kind of famous. He was pretty famous back in college too, infamous to some. Ironically, he was the least famous when he was in his prime. He only really became a known role player later on in his career, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to the early 2000s. Playing for Duke, JJ turned into one of the most polarizing players of the 2000s. To his fans, he was a three-point artist, someone who could bury teams with his limitless range. To his haters, well, let's just say arenas full of students made their feelings known every time he touched the ball.
360, but then a turnover and 2 missed shots, and then the 2 fouls against Redick.
Statistically, JJ was a monster. He's the all-time leading scorer in Duke history, finishing with 2,769 points. He also shattered the NCAA record for career three-pointers made with 457. By his senior year, he was putting up 26.8 points per game, hitting over 42% from deep. For context, averaging 27 points in college is like averaging 35 in the NBA today. Games are shorter, slower, and way more defensive. And Redick didn't just pile up stats. He racked up hardware. He won the Naismith and Wooden Awards as National Player of the Year. And he led Duke to multiple NCAA tournament runs, including a Final Four appearance. But not everything was sunshine and rainbows. His college career ended with a tough loss to LSU in the Sweet 16, where JJ shot 3 for 18. It was a brutal end to an otherwise legendary run. While it sounds corny, all the experience in college helped JJ learn how to thrive under pressure. That's something he needed in spades in the NBA. When Redick entered the league, expectations were, well, in all honesty, really complicated. On one hand, you had this legendary college shooter, Duke's all-time leading scorer, someone who put defenders in a blender nightly. On the other hand, he was a 6'4" guard with limited athleticism and defensive issues, trying to carve out a role in the league built for physical freaks. His first few years in Orlando were, to put it mildly, rough. Between sitting on the bench and struggling to adjust to the speed of the NBA game, he averaged just 5.5 points over his first 3 seasons. The media was quick to throw the bust label his way, questioning if his shooting could ever offset his lack of defense. JJ even admitted later on that those early years were humbling. "I was the butt of a lot of jokes, and honestly, they were fair." But JJ didn't cry about it. Instead, he reinvented himself. By the 2010 season, he started to figure things out, becoming a vital piece in Orlando's rotation. His shooting helped space the floor for Dwight Howard, and over time, he built a reputation as one of the league's most reliable shooters. By the time he was traded to Milwaukee in 2013, he cemented himself as a starter, averaging 15.1 points per game that season. The real glow-up came when he landed with the Clippers. Playing alongside Chris Paul and Blake Griffin, Redick thrived as a sniper, leading the league in three-point percentage in 2016, hitting a ridiculous 47.5% of his shots from beyond the arc. He wasn't just a shooter either. JJ was a pro's pro, running off screens like a madman, keeping defenders glued to him, and opening up the court for his teammates. By the time he retired in 2021, JJ had become a respected veteran, ranking 15th in all-time three-pointers made. And as most of you know, after a short but great career in broadcasting, he's now trying to help the Lakers make the most out of the LeBron era. My bad. I meant the LeBron and Bronny era. My bad.
The New Orleans, Oklahoma City Hornets select Hilton Armstrong from the University of Connecticut.
With JJ out of the way, we get into the, let's say, more random section of the draft. Despite being lottery picks, many of these players struggled to find minutes early on. We're still in the lottery, yes, but from how little a lot of these guys ended up playing at the start of their careers, it's fair to say that teams were having trouble fitting a lot of these guys in. While we're still in the lottery, this next pick really shows how chaotic the 2006 draft was. Hilton Armstrong, described as a mystery for NBA scouts. Somehow, he ended up as the 12th overall pick. That alone probably tells you all you need to know about how wild this draft was. Armstrong played for 4 years at UConn, but let's be honest, it took him a while to make any impact. For his first 3 seasons, he was basically just another body on the court, averaging fewer than 4 points per game. But by his senior year, things clicked. He was named Big East Defensive Player of the Year in 2006, averaging 9.7 points, 6.6 rebounds, and 3.1 blocks. Not exactly dominant, but enough to make scouts drool over his potential as a defensive anchor. Okay, I've mentioned Emeka Okafor way too many times in this video. I don't know how to feel about it, but here we go again. Armstrong credited his former teammate for pushing him to bulk up and improve his work ethic. Playing under a powerhouse program like UConn certainly helped his draft stock, but even with his pedigree, scouts were scratching their heads. One described him as having NBA-ready defense, but questioned if his offense would ever come around. Spoiler alert, it never came around. The Hornets decided to gamble on Armstrong, hoping he developed into a versatile defensive big man alongside Tyson Chandler. It didn't pan out. Armstrong's NBA career lasted just 6 seasons, with averages of 3 points and 2.6 rebounds per game. The only relevant headline I dug up about him from his time in the league was joking around about the time he was spending on the bench, which pretty much sums up his career. After bouncing around the league, he found more success overseas, playing in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. By 2024, Armstrong had transitioned into coaching, landing a role as an assistant for the Santa Cruz Warriors. Although he didn't have an average career by NBA standards, I'm happy his story didn't end with him doing something crazy or fading to obscurity.
The Philadelphia 76ers select Thabo Sefolosha from Switzerland.
The Thabo Sefolosha pick brings a unique story into the mix. The Sixers initially selected him 13th overall, but quickly traded him to the Chicago Bulls. This was part of a deal aimed at addressing each team's specific needs. Philly wanted an athletic wing like Rodney Carney, while Chicago was looking for a versatile defender to strengthen their roster. Sefolosha's pre-NBA life set him apart from a lot of guys in this draft. He was born in South Africa, raised in Switzerland, started professionally in France, and before the US played in Italy. By the time he declared for the draft, scouts were impressed by his defensive instincts, versatility, and wingspan, all of which made him a promising prospect. In his final season with Chalon, he averaged 9.1 points, 6.8 rebounds, and 2 steals per game, which is a pretty solid stat line for a young player in Europe. Once in the NBA, Sefolosha carved out a reputation as one of the league's most reliable defensive role players. He found his stride with the Oklahoma City Thunder, where he played a crucial role during their rise to prominence. He was very often tasked with guarding the league's best scorers, from Kobe to LeBron, and earned a spot on the NBA All-Defensive Second Team in 2010. Later stints with the Hawks and Jazz further solidified his reputation as a defensive anchor. Of course, Sefolosha is known for something else that sets him apart: his shoes. While most NBA players wore the latest and best shoes on the market, Thabo stuck with Nike Air Max 90s for his entire career. Even to this day, I still can't believe it. It's hard to believe he managed to pull this off, but hey, if Gilbert Arenas can rock Gucci loafers, or Swaggy P can hoop in Yeezys, I guess anything's possible. His custom pairs, including one in the South African flag colors, became part of his unique story.
The Utah Jazz select Ronnie Brewer from the University of Arkansas.
Do any of y'all remember the Darren Williams, Carlos Boozer era of the Jazz? While they were never serious contenders, they made some solid playoff runs, and had a couple teams that could beat anyone on a good night. The Williams and Boozer duo was kind of like a poor man Stockton and Malone thing for the new century. Obviously, their games weren't identical, and Williams and Boozer weren't the force Malone and Stockton were. Although forgotten, these teams were really fun. And for a few years, an important part of the Jazz was our 14th pick, Ronnie Brewer. Selected as the final lottery pick of the draft, Ronnie brought with him a combination of defensive intensity, athleticism, and a jump shot so unorthodox it deserves its own highlight reel. The Jazz were rebuilding around Darren Williams and Carlos Boozer at the time, and Brewer's versatility seemed like a perfect fit for Jerry Sloan's defensive first system. Ronnie came from a basketball family. His father, Ron Brewer, was a 7th overall pick in the 1978 draft and had an 8-year pro career. Ronnie made his own legacy at Arkansas, averaging 18.4 points, 4.8 rebounds, and 3.3 assists as a junior. Despite his scoring, it was his defensive and slashing ability that made him a first-round prospect. Brewer's shooting mechanics, caused by a childhood water slide injury, were unconventional to say the least. With an elbow out form and a push-release motion, it wasn't pretty, but it worked well enough. His father initially tried to correct it, but eventually helped him refine it for consistency. The Jazz didn't draft him to be a sharpshooter though. They needed a versatile wing defender who could disrupt opposing offenses. In Utah, Brewer developed quickly. By his second year, he became a starter, and in 2009, he posted career best numbers, averaging 13.7 points, 3.7 rebounds, and 1.7 steals while logging over 32 minutes per game. He embraced his role as a defensive specialist, often guarding the league's top perimeter scorers. Brewer is also remembered for his time with the Chicago Bulls, where he played a crucial bench role in the 2011 squad, which had the league's best record. After stints with Memphis, New York, Oklahoma City, and Houston, Ronnie's NBA career came to an end in 2014. These days, he's back where it all started, coaching at Arkansas, where he's helping the next generation of players, including securing 5-star recruits like Anthony Black in 2022. Okay, we're out of the draft lottery, and if you've been keeping track, it's been kinda rough. Sure, Aldridge, Rudy Gay, and depending on how you look at it, Brandon Roy lived up to the hype, but for others, not so much. Here's a stat line that puts things in perspective. 8 out of the 14 lottery picks didn't even make it 10 years in the league. Injuries, bad fits, or just plain overestimations. It's a ton of missed opportunities. And it raises an interesting question. Is 2006 shaping up to be one of the weaker draft classes in recent memory? I mean, when you compare it to the star power of 2003, LeBron, Wade, Melo, and Bosh, or even looking ahead to 2009, Curry, Harden, and DeRozan, it's not looking great. Though to be fair, we're only halfway through our analysis. The draft's saving grace might be lurking in the later picks. While the lottery has been a mixed bag at best, some of the real gems were actually hiding right outside the top 20 picks. Sometimes the best value comes from unexpected places. But before we get to those hidden gems, we've got to wade through picks 15 through 21st, some of which barely made a ripple in the NBA, before we hit one of the true standouts of 2006.
The New Orleans Oklahoma City Hornets select Cedric Simmons from North Carolina State University.
The Hornets are at the start of the CP3 era. Their offense was more than decent, but they needed a defensive presence in the front court, and Simmons, an NC State forward who recorded 2.5 blocks per game, seemed like a good choice. Sadly, he wasn't. Simmons ended up playing 75 games in his entire NBA career. That isn't a huge surprise. He found some success overseas, playing in Greece, Spain, and Italy, among other places. What's the most interesting thing about him? Well, he's actually the worst free throw shooter in NBA history for players with at least 10 attempts. In 2008, he went 0 for 10 from the foul line.
The Chicago Bulls select Rodney Carney from the University of Memphis.
The Sixers traded for the 16th pick, landing Memphis standout Rodney Carney, known for his athleticism and record-setting three-point shooting in college. He seemed like a solid pick to boost their wing depth, but Carney's NBA career fizzled quickly. Over 5 seasons with 4 teams, he averaged just 5.9 points per game, never finding consistency. After leaving the league, he played internationally in places like Japan and Venezuela. What he's most known for? According to YouTube, either for dunking on Dwayne Wade or getting dunked on by Dwayne Wade. You can pick which one you like more.
The Indiana Pacers select Sean Williams of the University of Memphis.
The Pacers grabbed Sean Williams at 17, banking on his size and versatility. Coming off a strong freshman season at Memphis where he averaged 13.2 points and earned Conference USA Tournament MVP honors, Williams had plenty of potential, but potential doesn't always pan out. In 2 seasons with Indiana, Williams struggled with consistency and off-court issues. While he bounced around the league, his best year came with the Knicks in 2011, averaging 7.1 points. After a journeyman career, he faded into the land of basketball obscurity, better known as China.
The Washington Wizards select Alexei Petrov from the Ukraine.
The Wizards drafted Oleshki Petrov hoping they found a 6'11" floor-stretching gem. What they got instead was a tall guy who looks like Stewie Griffin and averaged 3.9 points over 3 seasons. But hey, Petrov still put together a solid 14-year pro career, balling everywhere from Russia to Japan. Not too bad for the white hole. Again, another testament to the terrible nicknames back in the early 2000s. We gotta do better.
The Sacramento Kings select Quincy Douby from Rutgers University.
Quincy Douby was a certified bucket getter, just not in the NBA. Drafted by the Kings during the early questionable decision-making era, Douby arrived in Sacramento as the Big East scoring champ, averaging 25.4 points at Rutgers. But in the NBA, it's a bit harder to score in the NBA. Over 3 seasons, he averaged just 4.1 points in limited minutes. Once he left the league though, he rediscovered his touch. In China, he set a CBA scoring record with 75 points and did this. Quincy was definitely a walking bucket before and after the NBA, just not during.
The New York Knicks select Ronaldo Balkman of the University of South Carolina.
Between the 90s and the 2020s, the Knicks were, well, really bad, most of the time. In 2006, they needed to find a star. While future all-stars like Rondo, Lowry, and Millsap were on the board, they took Ronaldo Balkman. Ronaldo was the defensive hustle guy that most teams had pegged for the second round. Knicks fans famously erupted in boos at the 2006 draft. Balkman had game, but he didn't stick around in the NBA for long. He spent 6 years in the league, averaging 4 points and 3.5 boards. Balkman's professional career spanned 14 years, stretching from Puerto Rico to the Philippines. Still, he's remembered less for his NBA stint and more for his infamous meltdown in the PBA. If you know Balkman, you know the viral video of him choking his teammate in a heated game and pushing brother Two-Bit away.
Wow, Two-Bit is doing the right thing here. Whoa, he's pushing Ronald Two-Bit away.
A lifetime ban followed, though it was later overturned.
The Phoenix Suns select Rajon Rondo from the University of Kentucky.
If you're ranking players from the 2006 draft based on their careers, Rajon Rondo is probably at the top, or at least in the conversation. 16 seasons, 4 All-Star selections, 2 rings, and the respect of everyone who's ever watched playoff Rondo take over a game. Coming out of Kentucky, Rondo was one of the most polarizing prospects in the class. Scouts loved his length, quickness, and defensive instincts, but his jump shot, it wasn't all there. And by not all there, I mean it was non-existent outside 5 feet. Rondo shot 27% from 3 and 57% from the line during his college career. Teams in the SEC didn't even bother guarding him on the perimeter. Combine that with the perception that he was raw and played in a half-court system at Kentucky that didn't showcase his fast break skills, and a lot of teams just passed by him. The Phoenix Suns, who drafted him at 21, didn't even want him. They immediately traded him to Boston for a future pick and cash. At the time, they were all in on Steve Nash and figured they didn't need a point guard. Boston, though, they saw something different. Danny Ainge saw a guard with elite defensive tools, insane court vision, and the potential to run an offense loaded with talent. Boston's bet on Rondo paid off almost immediately. By his second season, he was the starting point guard on the Celtics team that went 66-16 and rolled to an NBA championship. And he wasn't just along for the ride. Sure, the big three of Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Ray Allen got most of the headlines, but Rondo was the one keeping everything together. His defense disrupted opposing guards, and his ability to find teammates in the perfect spot made Boston's offense click. He was kind of like the ultimate glue guy. But in my opinion, Rondo is both underrated and overrated at the same time. Check this out. At his peak, he was hailed by fans as the best point guard in the league, a master who could control games without scoring much. But to critics, he was a mixed bag. His numbers didn't always pop off the page, and his lack of a consistent jump shot remained an issue throughout his career. Yet, dismissing him based on stats alone misses the bigger picture. Rondo's basketball IQ, defensive prowess, and the ability to elevate his game when it mattered most made him invaluable. Speaking of, I gotta go back to playoff Rondo one more time, because no matter what people say, even Rondo himself, this dude did exist. He turned up the dial in the postseason, delivering performances that made even his most vocal critics take notice. Consider this. Rondo averaged 9.8 points, 7.9 assists, and 4.5 rebounds in the regular season over his career. Respectable numbers, but in the playoffs, those averages jumped across the board, especially when the stakes were highest. Game 4 of the 2012 Eastern Conference Finals against Miami might be his magnum opus. 44 points, 10 assists, 8 rebounds, and pure brilliance on both ends of the court. For a player whose biggest flaw was scoring, Rondo didn't seem to have any issue when it mattered most. Statistically, Rondo is an anomaly. ESPN once broke it down and found he was the only player in a pool of 157 who improved in every statistical category: points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, and even turnovers in the postseason. It's a level of impact and adaptability few players can match. And it wasn't just the numbers. Rondo's presence on the court in the playoffs was magnetic. He controlled the pace, manipulated defenses, and always seemed to be a step ahead of everyone else. When playoff Rondo showed up, teams had to adjust or get left behind. Now, the Nets had the next 2 picks, and since neither of them really panned out, I'm grouping them together. I'm sorry.
The New Jersey Nets select Marcus Williams from the University of Connecticut.
Marcus Williams was supposed to be the Nets' answer for a backup to Jason Kidd, drafted for his court vision and elite passing out of UConn. But the problem was he left his best highlight passes at college. Williams had a promising rookie season, even making the all-rookie second team. But other than that, he didn't do too much. By the time he hit Golden State, he was already waiver wire material. Overseas, though, was a different story. Williams turned heads with a EuroLeague record of 17 assists in 1 game. So maybe he just needed a longer passport and not a deeper bench.
The New Jersey Nets select Josh Boone from the University of Connecticut.
The Nets must have loved UConn in 2006 because they went right back to grab Josh Boone at number 23. Known for his defense and rebounding in college, Boone became a serviceable big man for the Nets, even averaging 8.2 points and 7.3 boards during his best season. But if you know Boone, you probably remember his brutal free throw numbers. Let's just say Hack-a-Boone was an option. After the NBA, he found success abroad, winning titles in Bahrain and the ASEAN League before retiring in 2022. Nowadays, Boone's calling plays as a high school basketball coach, free from the free throw line forever.
The Memphis Grizzlies select Kyle Lowry of Villanova University.
Kyle Lowry wasn't supposed to be the guy. At 6 feet with a shaky jump shot and a fiery temper, he entered the league as your classic good energy off the bench pick. Drafted 24th overall by the Memphis Grizzlies in 2006, Lowry's ceiling seemed low enough to hang posters on. Memphis wanted someone to back up an aging Damon Stoudemire, but Lowry's rookie season barely got off the ground before a broken wrist sidelined him for most of the year. Not exactly the dream start. When he did play, you could see flashes, hustle plays, pesky defense, and a willingness to hit the floor for loose balls. But it wasn't enough. By 2009, Memphis had seen enough, shipping Lowry to Houston for what was essentially a bag of rocks. But this is where the story takes a turn. In Houston, Lowry went from the high-energy backup to, wait, is this guy actually good? He wasn't just pushing the tempo anymore, he was running the show. Suddenly, the jumper was falling, the assists were piling up, and Lowry was taking charges like he got paid by the bruise. By the time he landed in Toronto in 2012, he was ready to step into the spotlight. He turned the Raptors into a contender, became a 6-time All-Star, and brought home the franchise's first NBA chip in 2019. That fiery temper, it became leadership. The size, it didn't matter when he was throwing his body into bigger players to draw offensive fouls. But here's the thing, even in the twilight of his career, Kyle Lowry is still contributing. He's nowhere near All-Star level, of course, but that's not his role anymore. In 2023, he played a key role off the bench for the Miami Heat's unlikely run to the NBA Finals, proving he's still got plenty of gas in the tank. But let's settle an argument. Who is a better low first round pick, Lowry or Rajon Rondo? I'm not sure if anyone is debating this in the mid-2020s, but hey, I'm here for it. What do you think? Okay, Lowry's 6 All-Star appearances outshine Rondo's 4, and his longevity is impressive. On the flip side, Rondo has 2 rings, and a knack for stepping up in the playoffs. It's a tough call, but where do you guys stand at? Shoot a comment down below. You guys know I read all that stuff and respond to it.
The Cleveland Cavaliers select Shannon Brown from Michigan State University.
You probably know Shannon Brown from this dunk. Or this one.
Perkins sprained knee. Shannon Brown! Wow!
Or that one missed dunk where he seemed to levitate. Let's face it, if YouTube had a Gravity Doesn't Exist playlist, Shannon Brown would have a whole section. But here's the thing, Brown wasn't just some highlight factory. There was more to his game, and you know what? He proved it. Drafted 25th in 2006 by Cleveland, Brown didn't exactly light it up out of the gate. A few DMPs here, a stint in the G League there, his career was looking like a blink and you miss it type of deal. But then came the Lakers trade. By 2009, he wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. Brown carved out a role as a key piece in their back-to-back title runs, making big plays when it counted. No, he wasn't Kobe or Pau, but he fit like a glove in Phil Jackson's triangle, and that's no small feat. Sure, the dunk stole the show, because how could they not? But Brown was a legit two-way player. His defense kept him on the floor, and on his best nights, he could heat up for 15 or 20 points. Lakers fans didn't just cheer him on because he could dunk. They loved him because he mattered.
The Los Angeles Lakers select Jordan Farmar from UCLA.
You remember Jordan Farmar, right? Backup point guard, sneaky good, and a two-time champ with the Lakers? No, not yet? What about the guy who was always included in every 2K trade deal back in the 2010s? Ah, yeah, now you remember him. Okay, let's rewind a bit. Drafted 26th overall in 2006, Farmar was coming off a solid college career at UCLA, where he led the Bruins to the NCAA championship game. Smart, quick, and with a surprising 40-inch vertical, Farmar was primed to be a great supporting piece. His early days in LA, let's just say he had to survive the Smush Parker era before finding his groove behind Derek Fisher. By the time Kobe and the Lakers started rolling back-to-back championships in 2009 and 2010, Farmar was a reliable presence off the bench. After chasing bigger minutes with the Nets and a brief overseas detour during the lockout, he returned to the Lakers in 2013. A short, productive career defined by versatility and those two shiny rings. Farmar knew his role and played it well. These late first-rounders had very short NBA careers, so there's not a lot to unpack here. But hey, when we've got music producers, brawlers, and a guy who probably introduced himself as Joel from England, there's still something to talk about, so let's get into it.
The Phoenix Suns select Sergio Rodriguez from Spain.
Sergio Rodriguez, aka El Chacho, brought elite court vision and a nickname that basically means the dude. Drafted by Phoenix and sent to Portland, he spent 5 NBA seasons teasing fans with his flashy passing, but struggled to score consistently. His 2017 stint with the Sixers was his peak, 7.8 points and 5.1 assists in limited minutes. After leaving the NBA, Rodriguez became a legend at Real Madrid, where he stacked a good amount of trophies.
The Dallas Mavericks select Maurice Ager of Michigan State University.
Maurice Ager's NBA career was brief, logging just 82 games across 4 seasons. Drafted by the Mavericks after a standout run at Michigan State, where he led the Spartans to a Final Four, Ager struggled to find his footing in the league, but his second act, pure redemption. Ager pivoted to music, signing with Akon's Convict Music and producing for artists like E40 and Royce da 5'9", who I've literally never heard of until I made this video. He even earned a Grammy nomination, proving there's life after basketball.
The New York Knicks select Marty Collins of Temple University.
Remember that infamous Knicks-Nuggets brawl with J.R. Smith, Melo, and Nate Robinson?
And he continues now, watch.
Yeah, that's Marty Collins right there. And look at that, now you've seen Marty's biggest career highlight. On the court, his 4 NBA seasons were forgettable stat-wise, but post-NBA, Collins thrived overseas. Turns out, Europe loved what New York didn't. Steady minutes and way fewer fights.
The Portland Trailblazers select Joel Freeland from England.
Joel Freeland's NBA legacy is just as confusing as a scouting report. British, big, and drafted based on workouts nobody saw. While his NBA stint didn't wow, Freeland found success in Europe, winning a EuroLeague title with CSKA Moscow in 2016 and earning millions along the way. James Flight White had one of the more fascinating careers for a guy who barely made an NBA dent. Drafted 31st overall in 2006 by the Blazers, he was immediately traded to the Pacers and never suited up for the team. Instead, the Spurs picked him up, where he warmed the bench on their 2007 championship roster, more than a solid consolation prize for not cracking the rotation. When he failed to sign another NBA contract, he went overseas, playing in Russia and Italy for a few years. While playing for Scavallini Pesaro, he posted an impressive 17.4 points on 52% shooting from the field, in over 30 Italian A-League games. That season got him back on the radar of NBA teams. Now let's take a break to talk about what White was mostly known for, his dunks. Remember this dunk from Zach LaVine? James was doing this stuff a decade earlier in dunk contests all over the world. He was the first to either do or perfect free throw line dunks. We're talking two-handers, windmills,
Gotta have this or it's over, and he got it!
and even East Bays from the foul line, more than 15 years ago. The dude was way ahead of his time with dunking. Those who were there to see him in 360p are well aware of this. In 2013, he did get a chance on the ever-dysfunctional New York Knicks. At the age of 30, he inked a 1-year deal with the Knicks, and was expected to play a decent role on the roster while Iman Shumpert recovered from an ACL injury. Of course, he was also expected to appear in the dunk contest that year at the All-Star Weekend. He did play a role early, but inconsistency and a lack of fit on the roster limited his impact. He scored 0 points in nearly half of the games he appeared in that year, and finished last in the 2013 dunk contest, an ironic ending for a dunking icon. Post-NBA, White became a Big Three legend, helping Trilogy to 2 championships and snagging Defensive Player of the Year in 2017. 3 years after retiring, James became a member of the Minnesota Timberwolves coaching staff as an assistant, so he's staying near the game. The late 2000s and early 2010s were often really generous for specialists. Just ask Steve Novak. The 6'10 sharpshooter led the NBA in three-point percentage in 2012, hitting an absurd 47.2% with the Knicks. A one-trick pony? Sure, but that trick kept him in the league for 11 years and helped him earn over $20 million over his career. Solomon Jones made a name for himself as a bench defensive specialist, averaging 3 points and 2.3 rebounds over 8 seasons. He didn't exactly stuff the stat sheets, but his 0.7 blocks per game in limited minutes kept him in rotations. After the NBA, he extended his career overseas and in minor leagues. Not all role players had great runs in the league. Here's Paul Davis. He only played 82 games in the league, averaging 2.6 points and 1.9 boards. He found way more success in Europe, where he had a solid career with Spanish powerhouse Caja Sol Sevilla before retiring in 2015. Staying on the topic of role players, the 35th pick had one of the strangest paths of really making it to the NBA. Despite being the Big 12 Player of the Year at Texas, and averaging an impressive 16.1 points, 9.5 rebounds, and 2 steals per game, his size worked against him. Tucker stood at just 6'5", undersized for a power forward, and his perimeter game wasn't polished enough to secure a role as a guard or wing. The Toronto Raptors took a chance on him with the 35th pick, hoping his hustle, defense, and leadership would translate to a rotation spot, but it didn't. Tucker barely saw the floor in his rookie season, playing just 83 minutes over 17 games. The Raptors even waived him before the end of the first year, and Tucker found himself without an NBA home, a raw but unrefined player unable to find a niche. After less than an hour and a half of NBA action under his belt, PJ could have faded into obscurity, but instead, he decided to reinvent himself overseas. From Israel to Germany, he turned every league into a proving ground, playing with relentless effort and refining his game. In 2008, he led Hapoel Holon to an Israeli League championship, ending Maccabi Tel Aviv's 14-year dominance, and earning Finals MVP honors along the way. Tucker's defensive intensity and work ethic made him a star in Europe, and by 2012, he was dominating Germany's Bundesliga with Borussia Bamberg, claiming MVP honors again. He used his time abroad to evolve into a versatile defender who could guard multiple positions and knock down the occasional three-pointer. Tucker had developed the grit and polish that NBA teams hadn't seen in his rookie days. So, by the time the Phoenix Suns came calling in 2012, PJ was ready. What kept Tucker in the league is very simple: effort, defense, and corner threes. No one has ever accused him of being flashy, but there's something undeniably valuable about a guy who will guard LeBron on one end, knock down a corner triple on the other, and act like it's all in a day's work. Throw in his championship run with the Bucks in 2021, and Tucker's legacy as one of the league's premier glue guys is cemented. And even though he didn't win with that one Rockets team, he was a major piece to how far they did get in their glory days with James Harden. Oh yeah, and the shoes. We can't talk about Tucker without mentioning his shoe obsession. This guy doesn't just wear rare sneakers, he hunts them like Pokemon. Custom pairs, unreleased models, game-worn exclusives, you name it, Tucker's probably rocked it on the court. It's kind of wild that this draft produced two players really more known for their shoes than their actual NBA play. The next 6 guys didn't leave a huge dent on the league, so let's look at them quickly, starting with these 6 picks spent 11 years in the league total, mainly thanks to this guy who had a solid 6-year run in the NBA. Craig Smith was a solid big who relied on bully ball to overpower backup centers. He averaged 7.6 points and 3.9 rebounds in his short career, which are great numbers for limited minutes. Bobby Jones had all the hustle and defense you could ask for, but offense, not so much. After 2 brief NBA seasons, Jones became a well-traveled journeyman, suiting up in leagues from Italy to Puerto Rico. He's probably best remembered for being a great family member that once played in the NBA. The Warriors drafted Kosta Perovic at 7'2", a Serbian center with solid post moves and a nice touch, but unfortunately the NBA wasn't impressed, and his one season in Golden State ended with matching highs of points and fouls, 2 apiece. Back in Europe, it was a little bit better, winning championships in his home country and across Europe. His biggest NBA highlight? The Bleacher Report put him on the list of players with the coolest names in the NBA, which is not much. David Newell's one NBA season was unforgettable. Was forgettable. But his college legacy at UNC wasn't, especially his role in the Tar Heels' 2005 NCAA title. After Milwaukee, he went global, dunking his way through leagues in France and the Philippines. Remembered more for his hops than his box scores. While Dunham Brown sadly never made it to the league, anyone who scores 111 points in a single game deserves a mention. He did it in high school, but still, how many people do you know did something like that? The UConn standout played worldwide, from Turkey to Venezuela, and left his mark on Canada's national team. No NBA minutes, but plenty of passport stamps. James Augustine had a short NBA stint, but a long-lasting impact at Illinois, where he helped the team to a 2005 title game. Post-NBA, he dominated in Europe, especially with Khimki Moscow, which again proves that not all hoop dreams are built in the States. After the 40th pick, not a lot is expected from players. However, Boobie Gibson was a nice surprise to a lot of Cavs fans. His rookie season, while fine, didn't really scream playoff hero. He played around 17 minutes and averaged 4.6 points per game. However, he was a good shooter from the get-go, knocking down nearly 42% from deep. No one could have predicted that in Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals, he'd explode for 31 points, going 5 for 5 from 3 and 12 for 15 from the free throw line. He helped the Cavs to their first ever NBA Finals, which is why fans still remember him to this day. After that breakout moment though, Gibson's NBA career never quite took off the way it could have. Injuries slowed him down, and despite being a reliable shooter, his impact faded over the years. But ask any Cavs fan and they'll tell you that he's a legend, not just for what he did on the court, but for his love for Cleveland. Hold up, let's not forget, he's a certified music artist and is still a fan favorite in Cleveland. Boobie might not have the career numbers, but his place is cemented in Cavs history. The Hornets hoped Marcus Vinicius could add some Brazilian flair to their roster, but the forward only managed 26 games across 2 seasons. He did thrive in his home country and Europe though. Despite being drafted by Orlando and traded to Houston, Lior Eliyahu skipped the NBA altogether. The Israeli forward built a stellar career with Maccabi Tel Aviv, stacking EuroLeague titles and representing his national team in multiple competitions. Athletic guy who played for the Grizzlies and the Heat in 2 seasons. Post-NBA, he took his talents to China and Puerto Rico, where he played for a few more seasons. D. Brown's NBA run was brief, but his college days at Illinois are legendary, leading the team to the 2005 NCAA championship game. Internationally, he found his second win, becoming an all-star in leagues from Turkey to China. Okay, Paul Millsap definitely wasn't the flashiest name in the 2006 draft, and there is a reason he fell to the 47th pick. Scouts worried he was too small to play power forward at 6'7", and his lack of an outside shot didn't help. But Millsap quietly turned into one of the most impressive careers from this class. Known as a rebounding machine, he led the NCAA in boards for 3 straight seasons. He made up for his perceived limitations with grit, versatility, and an involving offensive game. In Utah, he started as a backup to Carlos Boozer, but quickly proved he was more than a reserve. By the time Boozer left, Millsap was dropping 17 points and snagging 8 rebounds a night. Then came his prime years in Atlanta, where he transformed into a 4-time All-Star, anchoring the Hawks to a 60-win season in 2015. Millsap could score inside, knock down a 3, and defend just about anyone on the court, all while staying criminally underrated. Later, he moved to Denver, where he mentored young stars like Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray, and helped engineer that insane 3-1 comeback against the Clippers in 2020. Though his final NBA seasons with Brooklyn and Philly were quieter, Millsap's career spanned 16 years of excellence. And just recently in 2024, he's officially retired. Oh boy, am I plugging another video again? Yes. Remember the Forgotten All-Stars video I mentioned like an hour ago? He's in that one too. Go watch it after this one. The Wizards definitely took a swing on Vedeminko, hoping for a Nowitzki light with EuroLeague experience. Yes, another next Dirk. This one never made the leap to the NBA, but in Europe, a reliable scorer, dunker, and multi-champ. Leon's story is pretty heartwarming. The man went from being homeless to an NBA champion in just a couple of years. A second-round steal, he delivered clutch performances for the 2008 champ Celtics, including a 21-point game in the finals. His career was basically cut short by reoccurring knee injuries, but his impact in Boston is forever etched in fan memories. Ryan Hollins wasn't a star, but a 10-year career for the 50th pick is definitely a win. The athletic big man brought energy and defense to 9 different teams. Post-retirement, Hollins traded dunks for hot takes, some so infamous they've inspired entire YouTube compilations. Maybe the NBA was the easier gig. For being the 51st pick, Czech Som was a great shot blocker, but even a great shot blocker like him can get caught every once in a while.
Opportunities making the most.
His career lasted just 20 games before he went to play overseas. He was a journeyman in Europe as well, since out there's always a market for a rim-protecting 7-footer. Guillermo Diaz barely made a splash in his 6-game NBA career, but internationally, the Puerto Rican guard thrived. Known for his scoring, Diaz became a star in Italy and Puerto Rico. Most NBA fans probably never heard of Yotam Halprin, but EuroLeague fans definitely know him. He was one of those key players on Maccabi Tel Aviv when the team was manhandling teams around Europe, winning EuroLeague in 2004 and 2005. Just check out the guy's list of accolades, and you'll see why he's so remembered in the old continent. Woo, Hassan Adams could jump out the gym, but his NBA tenure lasted just 73 games. A star at Arizona, but his athleticism didn't fully translate to the pros. Instead, Adams played in many international leagues, exciting fans from Italy to the Philippines with his highlight reel moments. Okay, these 4 guys never made it to the NBA. Ejike Owaja never made it to the NBA, but built a solid career in Europe and the Middle East. A 2012 Olympian for Nigeria, he now runs a foundation helping Nigerian youth. Despite never playing in the NBA, Edin Bovcic's versatile game made him a staple in European leagues. The Bosnian forward's long-range shooting kept him in demand from Turkey to Italy. Lucas Mavroka found stardom in Europe, playing for powerhouses like Olympiacos and Panathinaikos. A solid post player, good scoring touch, played defense, did a little bit of everything. Basically a vintage Greek baller from the 2000s. J.R. Pinnock took his athleticism and defensive hustle around the globe, from Venezuela to Italy. While he never suited up in the NBA, he did help Panama win gold at the 2009 Concacaf Championship. Okay, and these next two picks only spent a year each in the NBA. Damir Makota's NBA run lasted just 30 games with the Bucks, but he made a solid career for himself playing in Europe. For the last pick in the draft, we have Will Blaylock, a guy who played 14 games with the Pistons before heading overseas. Known for his quickness, he carved out a journeyman career in Israel, Germany, and Australia. Here's another JJ that had a modest start and became an awesome role player down the line. JJ Barea NBA career might be one of the most improbable stories from the 2006 class, or any draft class really. Undrafted, undersized at 5'10", and not exactly a defensive stalwart, Barea still managed to carve out a 14-year career. Only 6 players his height or shorter have played 800 games in the league, putting him in the elite and vertically challenged company. Most of his success came as a spark plug for the Dallas Mavericks, where he spent 11 seasons with a brief 3-year detour in Minnesota. On offense, Barea was a reliable second-unit scorer and playmaker, cracking the top 10 in his draft class for total points and top 5 in assists. Guys, concerning his biggest career moment, I gotta be honest, although casual fans have been saying it for years, JJ didn't actually outplay LeBron in the 2011 final. He simply played above his expectations, while Bron below. Well, really below. But it's still something he'll be able to brag about for the rest of his life. Looking back at the 2006 draft, it's a story of what ifs, talent that didn't pan out, and surprises. Portland emerged as the clear winners, turning 2 picks and 2 smart trades into what could have been another dominant run, if injuries hadn't gotten in the way. We saw college stars like JJ Redick successfully translate their game to the NBA, while other college stars failed to rise to the occasion. But for every Rajon Rondo or LaMarcus Aldridge who lived up to their potential, there's a Patrick O'Brien or Sheldon Williams, guys who disappeared from the league so fast you might have missed them entirely. It's a perfect reminder of just how unpredictable the draft can be, and that anyone who does make it to the league should cherish their time in it before their opportunity is gone. So the question that I asked in the beginning, is the 2006 the worst draft of the 2000s? Not even close. If you think this class was rough, you clearly haven't seen my video on the 2000 draft. Trust me, it'll make the 2006 draft look like the golden age. Click right here to see just how bad things could get in the NBA.